Everyone, welcome back to the channel. My name is Andrew Ibarra, and in this video, we're going to be exporting your Azure policy assignments as well as Azure policy sets. Now, the reason for this is because through the Azure UI for Azure Policy, it's not the most intuitive and user-friendly to quickly export all of your active policy assignments. There is an export CSV button here that the product team did release maybe about a month or two ago, but even then, it's going to export like what you're seing here, which for people that are familiar with Azure Policy, here is just the overall assignments that currently are assigned, but there are individual policies that might be part of this. So as an active exercise, if I was to ask you, can you tell me all of the individual policies that you have across all of your Azure resources? You would have to manually click into each of these. As you can see, about 6 or 5 out of the 6 are currently initiatives. So for example, with the Microsoft Cloud Security Benchmark V2, once you click into it, you'll realize that it has 200 to 300 different individual policies that are actually part of this assignment. So getting every single one of the different policies across all the initiatives can be time consuming. And so for EPAC, we have this automated capability that you can run a command and you can export both the CSV format, so you get the very detailed breakdown in CSV for all the different policy assignments, the effects, the scopes, but you also get this very clean Markdown file that you can use to post to a SharePoint, or in my case, I have it automated to go to my Azure DevOps Wiki. So what you can see here, just to quickly walk you through it, it shows a title for like the currently list of Azure policies that are deployed, as well as the scope, and the name of the assignments that are deployed, and some properties relative towards each different assignment. But the real best benefit of this is towards the bottom or the second half of the Markdown file, where we show the policy effect by policy. So we'll actually alphabetically list all the different categories that we see. So maybe you have, in this case, API management, maybe you have Kubernetes, or maybe you have storage. Then we list the policy name and the description, as well as the scopes of where they're applied. So for me, everything right now is at the tenant root group, and you can see at the top one, it's currently set to disabled, which is in bold, and it also shows the other possible policy effects at this given scope. So we find that this is very helpful when it comes to getting something that's more human readable. Maybe you need to give, a list of the policies to somebody within your organization, maybe governance, risk, and compliance, or maybe this is during an audit, or maybe to a team of application developers that want to see, like, specifically for Kubernetes or specifically for compute, what are the Azure policies that that team needs to be aware of? More specifically, especially if they don't have access to the Azure portal itself or don't know where to go to actually find the resources or find the Azure policies, this is the best bet of how to quickly communicate and kind of share the list of Azure policies that somebody can easily digest and understand. So before we jump into it, I want to mention that there's going to be some code snippets that I did already upload inside of our Azure Enterprise Policy for Code GitHub site. So every single code that I'm going to be showcasing, building with you on this video is automatically posted to the site. Therefore, you can just quickly find it. It's going to be inside of our examples folder, inside of the auto documentation, and I'll walk you through this as we build it. Lastly, we're going to cover 3 different types of ways that you can run the command. Essentially, it's going to be one command, but you can do documenting all policy assignments inside of your environment, documenting very specific assignments. Maybe there's only 1 or 2, or maybe you want to just document policy sets, and we'll show you reasons of why you might want to do that as well. So let's jump into it and get started. We're going to have a folder structure here on this left-hand side, very common with most EPAC folder structures, but we're going to have this new one called Policy Documentations. And inside of it, I have another folder called Tenant, because for me, I have a pack selector called Tenant, and it's typically best practice to have a folder per your pack selectors. So within each folder, you have a documentation specifications file that has the needed documentation configurations per each pack selector. It's not absolutely required, but it's best practice, as it's just easier for the commands to notify, this is the specific pack environment that I'm trying to make documentation for. Again, I have this folder called Tenant, and in global settings, I have a pack selector called Tenant. So when I run the documentation command, it's automatically going to pick this one up because it's already configured to go to that specific scope. Inside of the folder, we're going to have a file. For me, I just named it doc.json. You can name it whatever your heart desires. It could be tenant.json. It could be documentation.json. As long as it's a .json file, we're good to go. On the website for Enterprise Policy as Code, we do have examples if you want to find some more robust examples to cover with maybe some pre-populated different properties that you can go through. We have it for documenting all environments, documenting very specific policy sets or policy assignments. But for us, and for the sake of the video, we're going to go ahead and get started by going into the Auto Documentation Examples folder and go into Policy Documentations. We're going to start with document all assignments. So I'm just going to copy this quickly and paste it here into the content of this file that's now inside of my folder. Starting from the top down, this file is going to document every assignment that's currently existing within your PAC selector, within your PAC scope. So for me, mine's going to be tenant. I want to make sure that as I'm filling this out, I'm going to update the PAC environment to match the PAC selector that I already have set up, and that matches the name of the folder. So for me, it's going to be tenant. For file name stem prefix, this is going to be the prefix to the name of the file that gets generated. It's mandatory because you can do a little bit of different combinations. So specifically for document all assignments, I just like to match it to the name of my PAC environment. Then you have an option to skip policy assignments or skip policy definitions. So if there is a specific policy assignment you don't want documented, or maybe there's a specific policy definition that might be assigned multiple different times, and you don't want that documented at all, right? You can throw the policy ID or the assignment ID into here through this array. It's just going to be a string. And this will automatically skip the policy assignment or policy definition once the documentation is being generated. And then we get down here to the documentation specifications, which is going to be 3 different properties. The file name stem is going to be the name of the file that gets generated. Because it is a file that's being generated and put into a directory path, it's not recommended to have spaces. Sometimes it throws errors. So for me, I'm just naming this Azure-policy-assignments. Inside of environment categories, we're going to leave this blank because we're documenting all assignments. In the next example, when we kind of select which assignments we want to document, we'll end up filling this out, but for now we can leave it blank. And then we have a title, which is going to be the name of the title of the document. And if you're following along, this matches what I had inside of the wiki at the very top, or that you see here. Now we're going to go ahead and save this, and we're going to run the command, which is going to be Build-PolicyDocumentation. If you had multiple PAC selectors, you could pass a PAC selector along, but for me, it's not needed because I only have one. So we're going to let this run, and we'll pick back up once this does finish, and we'll look at the output. All right, we can see that this was able to successfully complete. We can see the name of the file that got generated here and the title of it, which matches what we did in the configuration. On the output folder, we're going to notice the CSV that got generated, which is the more robust file that's going to have a clean breakdown of all the assignments, the scopes, and the descriptions for the assignments and the properties. Very helpful, but what we're mostly looking for is this Markdown file that gets generated, and we can use this now to upload to the wiki or to share with some of the different team members within our org. The other folder I want to call is the services folder. So as you're seeing here, if you have large policy sets to where it's a pretty big file, we have this services folder that breaks down based on the policy categories. So for example, maybe you have categories of Kubernetes or Key Vault, and if you want a very shorter Markdown file that's very specific to Kubernetes services, you can output this and maybe share it with a development team or application team that might be dealing with AKS clusters or Kubernetes. So now that we have this, let's go ahead and switch it up. So rather than documenting all assignments that exist within our tenant, maybe for you, you specifically want to document, 1 to 2, maybe a handful of different policy assignments that exist inside of your tenant. So for us, we're going to change it from document all assignments to document specific assignments. We're going to copy the contents here and replace what we have inside of our doc.json. Starting from the top, you'll notice instead of saying document all assignments, now it says environment categories. Environment categories are going to be very specific, scopes of where you want to document. So maybe for you, it's going to be your PAC selector. So for me, I'm going to update PAC environment with tenant. But maybe tenant isn't the best description for this environment. So this was mostly developed in the beginning when we rolled out EPAC. If you want to have multiple different PAC environments in here, in this one file, you can. So you can copy essentially this section and paste it multiple times to document multiple PAC selectors, combine it together, and then environment categories are going to be specific to the documentation to where you'll have different sections within the documentation. And so for me, maybe, my pack environment might be like EPAC dev or EPAC prod, and the environment category can be like production or maybe something a little bit more human readable. So for the sake of the video, and for me, I'm just going to copy environment category to match the name of my pack environment. Scopes is going to be something that's going to be part of the documentation as well. It's really only for readability and for kind of explaining what the scope is. So maybe your environment category or pack environment is going to be towards production, but then within production, you might have a list of 5 or 4 subscriptions, and you can list out those subscriptions here, or maybe the names of the management groups that fall within that category. So it's more just for human readability. And so when somebody's looking at it, they understand the scope of where this is being applied. And then we get to representative assignments, which is the main section that you need to update if you're trying to document very specific assignments. For me, I have a short name here for MFA and another one for storage HTTPS because I actually already have those assignments deployed inside of my tenant. And what I would do was update the ID here. So I'm going to look for the one for MFA quickly and replace the contents there. So let me find this one's the one for MFA. I'll copy this assignment ID once it loads. Copy, go back here, paste this here. And same thing for the storage HTTPS. So let me go back. Let me go to storage. We're going to copy the ID here and replace it with the contents for my second ID entry here. Now, it doesn't absolutely need to be storage and MFA for the assignments you want documented. Obviously, it's just part of the example. So delete entries, add entries as far as what assignments you want to have documented. And same for the short name. It doesn't actually need to match or have anything to do with the ID or the name of the policy. It just needs to be unique. And for me, I keep it aligned with the policies that I'm trying to get documented. Down to the documentation specifications, it's going to be the same configurations. The only thing that we do need to change for this is to add the environment category that we declared up here at the top into this array. So again, if you had this file to where you were trying to document multiple pack environments, you would have to list out all of the different environment categories within here for it to successfully document it and then categorize it and put it within the documentation. So we're going to save it and then run build policy documentation. Okay, so after it completes, we can go to the output folder that gets generated. It's going to be the exact same thing, but we're going to notice that it's going to be shorter to the exact assignments that we called out within the documentation JSON file. Same thing with the Markdown file. It's going to be a more short version, just documenting the very specific policy assignments that we called out within that file. Same thing for the services. If it finds any categories, it'll put them in here. So now let's move on to the last option when it comes to your file, which is going to be documenting Azure policy sets. If you go back to the example folder that we had, it's going to be this one, document policy sets.jsonc. I'm just going to go ahead and copy the contents here and replace it with what I have in my file. And now you'll notice that there's going to be a new property called document policy sets that replaces the document assignments and environment categories. Starting with the pack environment, we're going to name this one, again, the pack selector that we're trying to document. File name stem is typically going to be the name of the policy set or maybe the name of the pack selector, depending on your preference for what you're trying to document. Same thing with the title. Because I'm only trying to document one policy set in this example, I'm just going to name it Microsoft Cloud Security Benchmark v2. Same thing with the title. But if you were trying to document maybe 2 or 3 or maybe a couple different policy sets, definitely updating the file name would be recommended to be something a little bit more aligned with what you're trying to do, or maybe the pack environment. And then within the policy sets property, again, you need to give it a short name that just needs to be unique and hopefully relative to what you're trying to assign. And for me, this is the ID of the policy set of the Microsoft Cloud Security Benchmark that I want to document. At the very bottom, we're going to have environment columns in CSV. You need to give it at least one entry. So for me, I'm going to name it tenant. In some examples, which I'll cover in upcoming videos, like the Microsoft Cloud Security Benchmark, whenever you're dealing with 200 to 300 different possible policies and parameters for those policies, part of this documentation step when it comes to policy sets is it generates a CSV file that has the names of the policies, part of the Microsoft Cloud Security Benchmark or part of your policy set, and then has a column next to it for all the different policy possible effects. So maybe instead of having a dedicated policy assignment JSON to where you have 200 or 300 lines of code for all the different parameters, you can reference in your assignment file a CSV file, and this is what gets generated for you. So I'll end up showing you here once I run this command, but we'll have a dedicated video coming soon when it comes to using CSVs for policy effects management. All right, so in the output folder, we can see that we have this compliance.csv. Because this is a regulatory compliance policy, so ones like NIST or CIS, if it has controls, more specifically, if it has group names in the Azure policy set, which this one does, what it'll end up doing is finding the group names, it'll categorize them. So you'll see here, it's like control AI1, AM2, AM3, and then it's going to list all the different policies that are actually part of that specific control according to the policy set. So it's good to at least have some type of document that has an output through CSV of all the controls and the policies related to those controls. The next CSV that's going to be generated is that one that I was referencing. That's going to be the more detailed CSV that's going to have the effects here at the very right-hand side. So it's going to show the allowed effects that you could possibly set it to. And you can use this CSV to reference inside of an assignment file and update the column for tenant effects and then reference it. I'll make a dedicated video for how to do this, but this would be the file that you would need to store and then reference in that use case. The next file is going to be the JSON-C file, which is going to have some of the default parameters that are documented if you want to look through it. And the main file that we're going to be needing or using for the most benefit, it's going to be this Markdown file, which is similar to the assignment file, although this one's going to be obviously just a list of all the policies and the possible effects for this specific policy set that we're documenting. What I do want to call out before we move on to some of the more advanced topics is this file here that we went through. So we updated it for policy assignments, for all policy assignments, for specific assignments, and then for policy sets. You can mix and match. You don't have to have one specific file for policy sets and another one for policy assignments. Maybe you want to have a file that does all assignments and does a handful of policy sets all in one command in one go in one template. So all you simply need to do is just copy the section for document all assignments as an example, right? Paste it here, make sure you separate them, and this is it. So this is a configuration that now documents all assignments and documents policy sets. I kind of let it be up to you for what makes the most sense for what you want to document. Now to just finish with a more advanced topic, at the beginning of the video, I showcased that I had this file here that gets automatically pushed to the wiki inside of my ADO project. I do this through a pipeline with some YAML files, which I'm about to go over. I'm going to make a dedicated video on how to set up Azure DevOps and EPAC for the very first time. So if you haven't done it yet, you can end this video now. This might be a little bit more advanced, but for people that do have the pipelines already configured, I want to showcase quickly what configurations you need to do within this documentation file so that the commands work and automatically push. So what we need to do is within documentation specifications is add a few more properties, starting with Markdown ADO Wiki set to true, and then this ADO Wiki config section where you need to provide the organization, the project, and the name of the wiki you're trying to push. So for me, it's Dev Andrew, which is the name of the organization. My project name is EPAC, and the name of the wiki you can see here is epac.wiki. So in the file, the organization needs to be dev-andrew, the ADO project, keep EPAC, and same with ADO Wiki, we'll keep EPAC. If you wanted to document policy sets as well down below, you need to copy this section and paste it here as well. And the reason for this is because it's going to cover different use cases to where some people might be documenting policy assignments, some people might only be documenting policy sets. Whatever your use case is, it's typically best practice to have it set for both in case you're going to be pushing it. But let's say you might end up having quite a bit of different files or different sections within here. There is actually a global documentation specifications that are on our website for our documentations. And you can copy this and paste this into the top or anywhere within your document file. And this will overwrite or be the backup, essentially. It won't overwrite if you have a documentation specifications down here. This section will end up overriding if you have the global settings configured, but let's say you don't want to end up having this set twice. You could technically remove the sections down below and only have it stored once here at the very top. That way you just a little bit more cleaner and simpler approach. With that being said, let's look at the YAML file that I do have inside of the example folder. So if we go back to the example folder for auto documentation, go to YAML examples, I have one for the main pipeline itself that we use to actually call and set up for the configuration of the pipeline. I'll pass the variables for like the output folder and the definitions. You want to make sure that you give the pack environment that you want to run this for. So for me, it's going to be tenant. And you also want to give the service connection that you have set up within your ADO here. So for me, I think it's like EPAC plan or something. Maybe it's plan connection. This will be the service connection that is going to be used to authenticate and needs to have reader permissions to your tenant to see the Azure policies. Also, what I'm about to show, this needs to be the app registration that is added as a user inside of your ADO org so that I can actually see and push to the wiki. Now, down below, we're going to see that it's going to call this documentation YAML, which is the other file here. And this is the actual YAML that does the call to make sure it has enterprise policy as code and the AZ module, or the AZ resource graph module more specifically. And then down below where it calls Build-PolicyDocumentation, PS1, where it calls the PowerShell module, we just need to make sure that we pass either the script argument for Wiki SPN if we're doing a service principal configuration, like I was mentioning, or the alternative would be to do Wiki clone pat and pass the pipeline variable for the value of the personal access token if you're going to be doing that. Now, having both is not going to work. It's either going to be one or two, one or the other. And just to quickly showcase what configurations need to be done if we're going to do the Wiki SPN. Within the org settings of our Azure DevOps instance, we need to go to users and we need to add the client ID of the app registration that has the reader permissions to see those policies during the documentation. So we would find it in Entra ID, we would go to users here and paste it, and then we would give it the access level of basic, and we need to make sure that we add it to the EPAC project and give it at least project readers. Once you have this saved, you need to go back to the wiki that exists within your EPAC project, and you need to go to Wiki Security, go back here and paste that same client ID and find the name of that service connection of the app registration, and then hit contribute, set to allow, and at least have a read that's down here at the bottom, kind of blocked by my my video, with set to allow as well. And this is the only thing that's needed in order for you to run that pipeline, and with that configuration where you set it to the flag of Wiki SPN for it to know to push to the wiki automatically. Alternatively, if you're going to do the personal access token, what does need to be done is within your settings here at the top, user settings, you need to go to personal access tokens and you need to hit new token. You need to give it a name. Doesn't really matter what the name is here, but you do need to give it at least read and write to the scope down here for the code scope, or there's some additional scopes that you can configure. Maybe there's something a little bit more tailored to what you're trying to do. Once this is being complete and once it's generated, you need to copy the value of this PAT token, go back to your pipelines that you have for your documentation, and go to variables inside of edit the pipeline, variables. And then you need to give a new variable here. Whatever you paste for the name of this needs to be the variable that you call in the pipeline. And obviously the value for it is going to be that personal access token that gets generated. Definitely want to keep it secret and make sure that it's not overwritten when it does ride. And you'll see here, like if I was to give this wiki clone pat, when you go to set the value, when you're running that YAML file, it does need to be set down here to the $, quote, parentheses, wiki clone pat as an example for what the value would be for it to find it. So hopefully this was helpful. The last step I do want to call out is if you are trying to have multiple stages where you're running maybe a stage for a pack environment where you have one pack environment and then you want to do another stage for a separate pack environment. It would be something like this, where you kind of have them one after the other, and you just make sure that your service connection and the file that it's referencing, it's going to be passing that pack selector for the different stages. And what I like to do typically is, append this to the end of my deployment. So when I'm deploying policies to my environment, I just append this stage to the end of it so that it automatically documents it and pushes it to my ADO wiki. If there's something I did miss, or if there's something that you have any additional questions or comments on, feel free to comment down below. And if not, I look forward to seeing everybody on the upcoming videos for EPAC.